So affective factors, which basically are emotions, can determine success or failure. When you're in a foreign country, being able to live there without great emotional difficulties, as well as acquiring the language. And you see from this quote here, it says that learning a foreign language and the culture that goes with it is one of the most useful things we can do to broaden the empathy and imaginative sympathy and cultural outlook of children. Learning a foreign language does not happen just in the mind of the learner. Rather, it takes place in interaction between the learner in a certain social context. And in that context, we have imitation and modeling. So what is affect? Aspects of emotion, mood, attitude that condition behavior. So I think most people realize that the learner's attitude towards the target language and culture and the users of it, as well as the learner's emotional responses, very important when it comes to success or failure. And Arnold claimed that neither the cognitive aspect of language acquisition nor the affective is the last word. They cannot really be separated from one another because all learning is emotional. Our values. Is it useful for me? Make constant judgments. We remember those things that have emotional significance. The way we feel about ourselves and our capabilities can either facilitate or impede our learning and underline the difficulty of isolating the cognitive aspects. For at many points, affect inevitably enters the picture. Usually people mention the work of Krashen and his affective filter hypothesis. It has three aspects: motivation, self-confidence, and anxiety. Performers with high motivation generally do better, and specifically integrative motivation. Instrumental means to get a job. Some reason that's not directly related to a desire to integrate into society of the target language. The next is self-confidence, and performers with self-confidence and a good self-image tend to do better in foreign language acquisition. And the third is anxiety. Low anxiety appears to be conducive to second language acquisition, but that's not saying completely get rid of the feeling that comes with anxiety, because a small amount can be motivational. Krashen talks about the affective filter. So when it's activated, it means it's blocking the acquisition of the language. So when the filter is high, opportunities for learning or attaining comprehensible input from a neurological standpoint. When the amygdala senses threat, it becomes overactive and it delays or blocks electrical activity conduction through the higher cognitive centers of the brain. Basically, if you're looking at this picture, you have the higher areas of the brain where we have the higher cognitive functions. You have the amygdala right down here in the red. So new information cannot pass as efficiently through the amygdala's affective filter to gain access to the brain's cognitive processing and memory storage areas, such as the left prefrontal cortex. I want to talk about anxiety a little bit more. Dreaming is extremely important for learning, especially episodic. In the REM episode, rapid eye movement. So episodic dreams are when your brain is trying to make sense. It's taking everything you experienced to now and your total worldview and it's trying to fit it in there in a sense. That's a broad sense. Now, in a more specific sense, let's say you're learning a new language, and especially not so much vocabulary, but rather syntax and how the logical aspects, the semantical aspects of the language, that is what your brain is dealing with in REM sleep. If you have high anxiety, your cortisol levels, if they're very high when you go to sleep, you're going to have very scattered dreams. 86 Chinese students in a study I did at my university in Japan. I teach in Japanese mainly, but I have Chinese students, Nepali students, Vietnamese students, Thai students, Bengali students, on and on and on. And so I chose the Chinese students because they're majority. And I always notice that there are some Chinese students who, when they talk, I have to think, oh, is that person Chinese or Japanese? You know, they speak so well. And there are others, the second they open their mouth, Chinese. I wondered why. Some of these ones that I can recognize immediately had been in Japan around 10 years. So I looked into it. So I separated in 5 groups according to their ability in Japanese. In other words, they had to do an interview and read something, and then I had Japanese people judge it. And then I used this global competencies inventory, a Chinese version, 176 question questionnaire, which takes a look at various aspects of their personality. One of those is emotional resilience, which means the level of emotional strength and your ability to cope favorably with irritations, setbacks, frustrations, failures. Sounds like language learning, right? Living in a different culture. And the capacity to recover quickly from psychologically and emotionally challenging situations. Again, sounds like speaking a foreign language in a stressful situation, etc. These are sample questions. It takes time to get over a particularly stressful experience. I find little things often bother me. I have never been good at coping with negative emotions. Obviously, all these are reverse coded. Okay, you have 1 through 5, so you switch the answers. These are negative ones, in a sense. Okay. Emotional resilience represents the degree to which we are able to overcome such negative experience or feelings, and how long it takes to do so. So it's associated with coping potential and foreign language learning process. Here's the results. There's a high positive correlation between emotional resilience, very strong score, and their ability in Japanese. And then I have the top 17 of the 86 and the bottom 17, and their mean score was significantly different. It was significantly higher mean score for the top 17. So the best 17 speakers of Japanese had a mean score much higher than the lowest 17 for emotional resilience. Okay, so people who are quick to recover from adversity or negative experiences show strong connections between the prefrontal cortex, okay, you can see it here, and the amygdala, which is responsible for handling the emotional aspects of our cognition, of our brain. The prefrontal cortex quiets the signals associated with negative emotions, allowing the brain to plan and act effectively without distraction from negative emotions. So if you're stressed, how do you quiet the mind? Well, one way is mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. It can strengthen the neural connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So when I say strengthen the connections, it means it gets stronger over time. The more you practice it, the stronger your connections are. Observe what's happening in our mind and body or the external environment without reactivity or judgment, without moving to fix or run away. Mindfulness breaks the automaticity of our habitual reactions. The development of negative attitudes towards the target language, the culture of the target language, and or its native speakers can be expected to lower motivation to acquire language or to mimic the communicative behavioral traits of native speakers. So the way they speak, their body language, you're speaking Italian, or if you're speaking German, or you're speaking British, or you're speaking American, you're speaking Japanese. If we have a strong negative or positive experience with a native speaker of foreign language or the culture of the foreign language, we are apt to associate these feelings with the language in question. Okay, so we have this negative experience in the country or with a particular person, and it just associates automatically, unless you examine it, unless you observe it. You have to observe your feelings when you're using this language and see if there's any negative, if there is, why. So the amygdala assesses the motivational significance of emotion and emotional relevance of stimuli. In other words, is this important or is it not important? We do that constantly. What I'm saying right now, you're all doing it from the second I started talking, and also everything going on around you. Should I pay attention to this or that, or what is being said, etc. Constantly we are doing this. And so then the brain allocates attention and memory resources to various problems, and the variability in such allocations affects learning. What are the characteristics of these emotionally resilient people? They have a high level of emotional awareness. They tend to have a great deal of perseverance. They tend to have a strong internal locus of control, meaning they feel that they are in control. They don't blame other people. All problems are self-created. They don't feel like they're victims. And fourth, they tend to be optimistic, and they understand the value of social support. Okay, you have various types of language learners. You do have the more reclusive types who are trying to do it mainly cognitively, And then you had the very social types. Yeah, I'm an extreme social type. Just come up and talk to me. I like to talk to everybody. The next category is emotional sensitivity. I see to accurately read and comprehend the emotions of others and understand their feelings, understand their perspective. Here are the sample questions. Here's the results. Same comments. The top 17 has much higher mean score in this ability. I'm sure everybody is aware of. There are culture-specific rules about who can show which emotions to whom and when. And learning about these cultural differences in rules is part of the process of enhancing one's ability to interact effectively in cross-cultural situations. For example, in Asia, it tends to be a lot less expression of emotions. But if you go to Italy, Brazil, places like that, okay, a lot higher in Europe, okay, you're not expressing as much in Scandinavia and Germany. All right, so there are considerable difference among individuals concerning willingness to expand the circle of people to whom they are emotionally sensitive. We could be emotionally sensitive to certain people, and not to, we are, everybody is, and not to others. But you'll have to learn to expand this in the sense that normally we have the in-group, out-group. So those who are similar to us, we are more emotionally sensitive, and those who are different, we're not. So if you want to be successful at cultural adaptation and foreign language acquisition, you expand your circle, you talk to strangers. There's a natural tendency to be emotionally sensitive toward or empathize with those people with whom we identify the most, to just mention, okay, in-group versus out-group. And next, curiosity. Curiosity can expand our empathy. When we get to know people outside the usual social circles, we get new worldviews. You get to know people more deeply, then you have the possibility of greater empathy. There may be multiple definitions of empathy, but the most common ingredient is that empathy is or essentially involves a special kind of imagining that can be described as role-taking, perspective-taking, imaginative identification. Now, I don't know about everybody here, but I've loved languages from a very young age. And I also notice that whenever I see anyone, if I'm not concentrating on somebody else, on something specific, I often imagine what it's like to be that person, to look like that, to have that job, to have that problem, something that I constantly do. And I think for me, it's really helped in terms of acquiring a better prosody and accents in the languages I speak. And also, it's not just the way you speak, but also I think when this happens, you understand a worldview. And to really understand the language well, you have to understand the cultural background and worldview. Otherwise, you don't understand the higher levels of communication. Okay, so the capacity to imagine other situations and mental states becomes essential to our understanding of the thoughts and feelings that facilitate our interactions with them. If we have a high emotional sensitivity and understanding, then that will enliven the interaction, conversation, give you energy. When your emotional energy is up, you can learn a lot more. You've calmed down the stress and anxiety. The emotional significance of what you're talking about is much higher. You're more likely to remember it. I mean, I can remember phrases from 40 years ago in a foreign language that I had in a conversation, just because what that person said was quite meaningful at that time. Okay, so emotional sensitivity, especially in the terms of sensitivity that develops when one identifies with a reference group, or people who speak that language in that culture. This is very important in developing a native-like accent. You have the mechanics, so you can work on that. I mean, there are certain sounds you cannot distinguish in a new language at times. What you do is you pay attention to it. You get it exaggerated, and then you create the neural network which allow you to understand it first and then produce it yourself. Riora, he's really interesting guy. He experiments with alcohol. If you ever seen somebody put on one of the discussions, can you speak a language better when you're drinking alcohol? The first point, when you drink too much, all gone. Not only alcohol, he uses sedatives too in his experiments. He did experiments which at university, which now might be prohibited, getting graduate students drunk and giving them various downers and such. This is the 60s, you know. He suggested that empathy might play a significant role in a learner's relative ability to acquire authenticity or pronunciation in the second language. So he demonstrated that the more empathetic individuals tend to be better listeners and better attuned to the native features of speech. Therefore, emphatic individuals tend to acquire more native-like proficiency in the target language. I just want to point out that you can read this paper here. You can download it for free. Yes, yes, yes. I've written a number of papers on the subject of personality traits that facilitate or hinder language acquisition. Questions?
How to increase your integrative motivation?
How do you convince yourself to like a certain culture, or a certain group of people, or a certain language? Now, this is a tough question, you see what I mean? Because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about do you like it or don't you like it? It's emotions. Value does it have to you? So if you say, I want to learn German because I'm going to go get a job in Germany, that's the instrumental. But I knew this German, and this and such person was so nice, and the culture is very interesting, and you see where I'm going? That's a question you have to ask yourself, and then you have to think how you feel about that particular target language and such.
How do you make your attitude more positive?
There are books, right, about optimism. Learn to Optimism. That's a very good book. If you learn to become optimistic, you're learning to be positive. How and where to learn mindfulness? Just go to the internet and put in mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation. You can go to Amazon and buy 100 books. Now, some are better than others. If you're asking about my personal experience, there's been many factors. I think for me, the greatest was fasting and meditation and yoga, understanding my body, feeling my body. And when I would fast over 1 month's time with 10 days in the middle, only liquids, I get to a certain state where I would go into meditation, and I create a certain awareness that I can keep with me until I eat too much junk food again. I'm not a real fan of how-to books. I try to figure it out myself. But no, how should I say? I am a fan, and I want to see what other people say, but if it doesn't click with me, I turn it off, go to the next one, turn it off, like that kind of thing, until it clicks. We create our own problems. You can't turn to somebody else to solve your problems. That type of thing. That's the same as developing mindfulness, realizing that that's the truth. Identify differences across culture with emotional awareness or suppression. With emotional awareness, I don't think you can. With emotional suppression, certainly you can. With expression of emotions, and maybe that's a type of suppression. Depends on the kind of culture you grew up in and how you deal with stress and negativity. Yeah, there definitely are differences in culture and how people deal with negative feelings. Can the bottom 17 improve practically in this study? Yeah, I think if they become more aware. For example, I've known some Koreans in Japan, been there a long time, and they still say, Daigaku Gakusei. Okay, now listen to Japanese. Daigaku Gakusei. Now listen to Korean. Daigaku Gakusei. You hear it? Daigaku Gakusei. Daigaku Gakusei. I noticed that one big difference is the ones that can't do it, they don't have a strong affinity for Japanese culture, Japanese people. I guess the people can improve. One, if they notice it, they can try to force improvement, where you do like the speech therapy, things like that, and on and on. That can help, but that's the mechanics. It's never really going to happen till you get the emotions, the heart. Could you define what motivation means more specifically? For me, it's a positive word, but I'm mostly frustrated, so I wonder if that means I'm just stubborn.
I mean more what you mean by motivated, because for me that's a positive word, that I don't really feel positive when I do language learning. I just feel frustrated and angry and...
That's the emotional resilience one, right? Getting over your frustrations and such. Okay? So more you have to look at that than anything else, and then perhaps just look out why, or try to think of why you feel frustrated. Maybe it's the kind of goal you set. And I would look beyond language in that, and anything on all small, medium, and large goals that you set and how you react when you're not on, maybe you have a schedule in your mind about where you want to be all the time, and if you don't reach it, then, you're frustrated. It seems that would be the case, yeah. If certain societies are so open emotionally, example Spanish, are they so empathetic, etc.? No. Why are their second language acquisition skills so poor? No. Open. That thing about emotional expression has nothing to do with. Well, it does in a sense. Okay, being empathetic. The kind of empathy we're talking about. In other words, putting yourself. You can have somebody who's very emotional, but what they're doing is they're always expressing their own outlook, not thinking about what the other person is experiencing. Right? Oh, it's just for me. That's supposed to be Italian, or brat or something. You know what I'm saying? Okay, somebody could be very emotionally expressive, but that's not what we're talking about. Because we're talking about putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else and taking their perspective. So it's a different thing. How do you help students who have low self-esteem or don't tend to have a positive mindset? I don't get involved with that because I teach management. I teach cross-cultural management, international accounting, economics, things like that. So I'm not a language teacher. So I never really get into that. So how would I do it? Point out that they don't have a positive mindset and see if they want to change it, I guess. You can try to help them become aware of it, but they have to find the path. Can you learn to love a language and culture again after a series of negative experiences? You meaning in general or me? Who wrote this question?
In general, can a person learn to do this? Any person?
Yeah, but once you go in general, then you can't really answer it because everybody's different, right? So, you mean, is it possible in that sense? Is it? Oh, yeah, of course. Don't you think it's possible? But let's say there's a country that invaded another country, and then they developed this very negative attitude towards the language they were forced to learn, and they didn't learn it. But then later in life, they got interested, and then maybe they met somebody from that country, and then they fell in love. And from my perspective, personally, there's never been a language I didn't like the sound of particularly. I like some more than others. It's not the language itself; it's the people and the culture behind it. For me, I would say, yeah, it's possible.
Okay, when you speak to the stranger, do you consider yourself like more or less expressive person, and why? Like more expressive, like for example, people from Brazil and so on,
I change according to the person, and I think most people do. I mean, that's natural. Even if you're monolingual, we do the same. If I have a lot of experience in that language, just not knowing the language well, but a lot of interaction in that language. Okay, I mean, you could learn the language through, let's say, a book or something, and then you never interacted. Okay, so if I've had a lot of interaction, then I naturally go that way, quickly. But we all adjust to the other person. It's called the chameleon effect, and if you look and Google it, okay, and you can see it occurs all the time. Even in monolinguals, the way the number of verbs they use, passive verbs, active verbs, depending on the language, right?
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah. Okay. All right, that's it. It's time to go to lunch. Thank you.
If you would like to know more about my experience over the past 5 decades, learning and using more than 30 languages around the globe, with adventures in 101 countries so far, then please visit my website, polyglotdreams.com. There you will find my memoir, A Life in 30 Languages, translated in various languages and integrated with audio and dual readers to offer a great way to improve your target languages.